If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Have you ever had any creepy encounters in the woods, forests, or on trails, either with people or even paranormal things?
During my teen years, back in my hometown, there was an area called Hemlands. People would usually come here for campfires and walk their dogs, but there's also a sinister side to it. It's a common place for nudists in the summer. I remember a boy telling me about seeing a nude man riding a bike toward him and him having to run away, but I brushed it off as it was my go-to hangout spot with my friends. So, on a summer day, I and my friends decided to go into the woods, set up a picnic blanket, and smoke a spliff. Everything was going fine until my other friends decided to leave to go get some food from Tesco. Once they left, I noticed clothes hanging on trees, then I saw a man crouching, watching us, me and my friend who stayed at the picnic blanket. I turn around and tell her, and the moment I turn back, there is a 6 feet butt-naked man, holding a metal pipe in his hand, walking right towards us, only 4 meters away. I and this girl grabbed our bag and picnic blanket and sprinted into what I thought was a path, which was now overgrown by thorns. We ended up having to push through these thorns and even walk straight through a bee's nest to get away from this man. Luckily, we had a picnic blanket to avoid any bad cuts or stings, but still came out with a couple of scratches. To this day I still wonder what would have happened and what his intentions were. How long was he watching us? What did he want to do? If he had been running, there would have been no way of escaping. So I never thought I'd have my fears of supernatural things come true, but it happened nonetheless. My friend, D, lives in a place where there are no neighbors, and he said there are skinwalkers haunting the woods surrounding his house. Even his mom and his whole family believe it. The first day we were there, we were training outside for the first day I was there. That night, we were outside at around 10 p.m., taking the trash out. We were talking and stuff when I heard something snap, followed by something falling. It was fall, and I heard the leaves as it fell. When I looked up at the hill, I heard it at around 10 feet away from me. D was a creature, a pale white and skinny creature getting up from the leaves and dislocating its own shoulder blades. I was petrified. It stared at me for 5 solid seconds before I used all the cardio training I've been doing and sprinted to the house. D just stared at it. The following day, we found a booby trap that was set to trip, and an animal was broken. The trap was 2 feet away from where I saw it. The second night, it was late, and we were both in D's room. We heard a screech, a non-animal, non-human screech that sent shivers down my spine. He had seen this and said, "Do not be afraid, it feeds on fear." I had tried to stay calm. On the third and final day, in the afternoon, we were out and going to where he had claimed there was a weird portal/area that is connected to the Skinwalker. Once we had arrived, it was blocked off by trees. We were weirded out and looked at each other. Everything went silent. The trees swaying, the cats outside, even the leaves falling. And then I saw it in the distance. We had both been creeped out, and I just stared back. He and I still talk about what we saw when I was there. He and I love that. I'm going to get a ghillie suit, and when I can visit again, I'll be in those woods looking for it. So my sister called my family the other day and told my parents about a strange man that she and her friend came across. They had been there for about a week and were out walking in the redwoods when a man appeared out of practically nowhere and startled them. My sister claimed that he looked completely normal and was even kind of handsome, in her opinion, but he gave off a creepy vibe pretty quickly. He apparently began asking them weird questions like who they were and what they were doing out in his woods. After they explained that they were just out exploring, he quickly got annoyed and said they were liars. My sister and her friend began to walk away quickly as they assumed he was probably on drugs, but he walked after them and said more weird stuff. She says he even asked them to kiss each other because he knew they were lesbian lovers. They are not lesbians, by the way. My sister's friend apparently turned around and screamed at him to leave them alone. My sister said this is where he got scary as hell. She says he gave my sister and her friend the most evil and hateful look she's ever seen in her life, and he said this in response. "You two are such disrespectful witches. I've ended a few of you over the last few years, and I'll love to add you both to my count." My sister and her friend didn't even hesitate and both booked it right after he said that. They heard him chasing after them and screaming at them. My sister says that she couldn't make out much of what he said other than that he would chop them up and a few other threats. They both made it safely out of the woods, and they didn't see him anywhere. They got in their car and sped back to the town they were staying in. They called the police to file a report and headed to another area and will be heading home soon. I'm scared and pissed off that some creep did this to them. Voice in woods calling my dog's name. I had the weirdest experience in the woods by my cabin that I can't seem to shake off. I was working in the woods about 100 feet from my cabin, and I heard a voice call my dog's name twice. It was crackly, and I thought it sounded like a raven. My dog just sat staring in the distance toward a clearing, which she normally doesn't do. She's a guard dog and always keeps an eye on me. I looked around the trees to see if there was a bird, but nothing. My husband had passed away years ago and was strong. This is a relatively short story, but one of the scariest moments in my damn life. It was last Sunday, November 17th. My friend and I went to climb a mountain in our town and retake a photo we took that's almost at its second anniversary. For nostalgic reasons, to put it simply. There was a trail path at the start, but it didn't lead to the top fast at all, so we decided to take a shortcut and climb directly to the top. We had to go through bushes, branchy plants, tall grass, whatever they were. Some of them had this spike-like fur, which hurt us when we passed them. We were wearing jackets and pants, which served as slight protection, so it didn't hurt as much. It was dark out, and there was very little light source, so we had to use our phone flashlights to navigate. It took about half an hour of near slipping and pushing through branches to make it to the top. It was a full moon, and we could see a neighboring city from the view. Very pretty sight. So we went back down, having to go through more branches before finally finding a trail path that led back to where we started. It was all nice and dandy. I offered him my left AirPod, and we listened to some music. I put on my motivational playlist and we started walking. We were just about to make it out of the trail when I stopped to tie my shoe. We were playing Staying Alive by the Bee Gees while this was happening. My friend was walking around while I tied, but then stopped and looked behind us. Just when I finished tying and was about to get up, my friend said something along the lines of "Get up, run, hurry," and grabbed my jacket, and we started running. I had no ducking clue why we ran, but I didn't bother asking until we slowed down a bit after sprinting for what seemed like 15 seconds. I looked back while we sprinted but didn't see anything. We were in the city now, on the sidewalk. Still quite dark out, but there are light sources coming from stores, houses, and cars now. I asked him why we ran. And one of the scariest shit he probably could have said. A dude came out of the woods behind us. I asked him, "Really?" Because I didn't see or hear anything like that. He reconfirmed and said, "Yeah. He just came out of the woods on the left. He was talking about our right, but appeared left when we turned around." We just continued walking at a rapid pace, checking behind our backs every few moments in case the man was still after us. I asked him if he still had my AirPod, and he said yeah and gave it back to me. I placed both the AirPods back into my case and decided not to put them on for the rest of the hangout as I wanted full awareness with my hearing. After that all happened, we went to more stores to rest up and got picked up by his mom. We got home safely. For clarification, he and I are capable of self-defense, but we realistically can't do much. We're both teenagers still in high school. I'm 5 feet 4 inches, and although I've self-taught myself boxing for about 2 years, there wasn't much I could do against a bigger opponent. He, on the other hand, was about 5 feet 7 inches 5'8" compared to me. He also brought a pocket knife with him in case we came across a potentially aggressive animal during our mountain trip. We still didn't want to risk our lives potentially if the man had a gang waiting or a gun or weapon of some sort. That's basically it. One of the scariest moments of my life, happening just last week. I don't know if we plan on ever going back to that mountain again, but if we do, then we'll probably bring more people or go earlier in the day when it's brighter out. I am relatively new to this, and I have a few unanswered questions about something a buddy of mine told me he encountered. There are 2 things I am looking for information on. I would appreciate being pointed in the right direction. First, on the southern Oregon coast, the Elliott State Forest is a popular spot for hunting, camping, hiking, and target shooting. This friend of mine was hunting with another person and came across something peculiar, a perfectly circular clearing in the woods with no sign of human involvement. To make things weirder, there were 5 trees equidistant from each other that were taller than the rest. The way it sounded is these trees represented the vertices of a 5-pointed star within the circle. Second, in the same area, he and this other person found bear carcasses absolutely torn apart. According to him, there weren't any signs that these carcasses were fed on, they were just killed. As if they wandered into the territory of something that didn't appreciate the intrusion. What's stranger is my friend and the other person weren't attacked. Rather, they received what I could only interpret as a warning. These warnings were distant at first and always came in a sequence of 3 slams that sounded like a hammer striking a tree trunk. The final warnings that convinced them to get out of the area were 3 strikes that they could feel reverberate through the air. They never went back to the area and couldn't even if they wanted to. They can't remember exactly where they came across this clearing. Does anyone know what these could be? When I was a kid, my parents would take my sister and me to this farm out in the country near where we lived to chop down our own Christmas trees. The farm was about a 40-minute drive from the little town we lived in, and it was a Christmas tradition that we loved. We went to the same farm every year, and one of those years we had a strange experience together. One year, I believe I was around 13 or 14 at this time, on our way to the farm, we came upon this house we had never seen before. It was bizarre looking, almost like the Weasleys' house in Harry Potter, but more colorful. It was tall and thin, like every floor was a single room stacked on top of each other, and it looked like it was built out of a mishmash of materials, like some parts were made of wood and some parts were made of metal. It had filigree on the trim, and everything was painted in bright pastel colors, pinks, yellows, purples, and mint green. My dad slowed the car down to get a good look at it. I remember looking down at the house from the road. It was in almost a bowl-shaped patch of land surrounded by trees. There was smoke coming from the chimney and lights on inside, and we just sat and looked at it for a while, muttering to each other. We had driven this road every year for probably 10 years at that point and had never once seen it. It was so fantastical looking, it seemed like the kind of place everyone would know and talk about in our small community. Eventually we continued to the farm and went about the rest of our day, but later that night I had a vivid dream that we had stopped and been invited inside the house by a short, very sweet older woman. The inside was as wacky as the outside. We've never stopped talking about that day. We all remember seeing the house, we all describe it the same way and where it was on the road, but we've never been able to find it again. It should be noticeable, since most of the houses out in that area are log cabins, trailers, or old farmhouses. It looked nothing like any house I've seen before aside from in picture books. We've purposefully gone looking for it, taking twisty back roads through the woods to try to see it again. My dad was an urban planner for one of the transportation companies in the area, so he's obsessed with roads and maps, and he took us many times to try and find that house, but we've never seen it again. We've even asked people in the area if they've seen the house, but no one knows what we're talking about. I'm semi-convinced we entered some sort of time slip or dimension slip. I'm the only one that thinks that. I'm the less logical one in the family. The rest of my family thinks we just lost our minds for about an hour one day, lol. I just thought I'd share this weird and mystical experience. The old cornfield in New Orleans. Starting this off is really hard because I just have trouble explaining it really. I suppose I'll begin with the backstory. My brother, my boyfriend at the time, and I all decided that for my dog's birthday, we would go to Louisiana to party. Yeah, I'm the weirdo that celebrates a dog's birthday. And yes, I got the dog gifts, and we walked down Bourbon Street with him. As the night carried on, we got to the end of the street and were quite tired. So, a quick turnaround, and we were heading back to the truck. I need to clarify, if you couldn't tell, I am a woman. I'm 30 years old and a little on the tough side. Not much scares me or ducks with my head. My brother drove, being the sober one. So we end up on a dark road, and it's past 4 a.m. Needless to say, this was becoming a little less than relaxing. Mostly due to the fact that we could no longer see the road and we were hitting bumps. I mention this, and my brother decides, yeah, time to pull over, stop, and check shit out. So we did. I got out, leaving my dog, a pit bull, in the truck. We looked around a bit as best we could without going too far. Staying a few feet from the old Dodge. My boyfriend at the time walked on ahead, and we ignored that for a bit until he let out a yell and called out to us. You gotta come ducking see this shit, guys. He called as soon as we arrived at his location. I decided to take Shawshank, my dog. He did not like what we saw, nor did we. There, in this area, stood a man. Someone nailed him to a tall log. Standing up as if he was crucified. Then we really got a good look around and realized. We had been ducking driving in a cornfield for the past hour. Who had nailed this guy to a log? And where was this person now? Shawshank was less than happy. He was growling and barking a bit. I kept him quiet as best I could. My brother made it clear that we needed to go now. You ducking bet we took off toward the truck. The ducked up part was once we got there. All the doors were open. I had shut them. My brother looked around with my boyfriend, but they didn't find a person. Still, Shawshank was growling, and he was becoming more jittery. We got back in the truck and headed out, looking for the road when something popped into my head. Oh duck, guys, did y'all check the bed? I asked, when I realized no, they had not checked the back of the truck. My brother hit the brakes so hard we all hit the dash. I got out, being the badass that I am, and took my dog with me, and we walked around to the back. I make Shawshank jump in the back, and in a matter of seconds he was in the middle of mauling some dude. Sure enough, There was someone back there. An old-ass redneck backwoods mother-ducking swamp rat-ducking gator ducker. He even hurt my dog in the struggle. We got him on the ground, and the three of us all kicked the shit out of him, then got in the truck and took the duck off. Dude. Once we got on the road, we booked it back to our little town. We didn't know what to think, and we never told anyone really. I took my dog to the vet, and he's okay. This happened about a year ago anyway. But I will say this, the next time I go to Louisiana, I'm staying out of the cornfields. So this just happened to my cousin and me a few minutes ago, and it'll be short since it wasn't a long encounter. Since it's almost summer and we live in the backwoods of Maine, where your closest neighbor is normally a mile away, we decided to go firefly catching. So far we had only caught one firefly, so we decided to go across the road to see if we could find any more. We walked over halfway across the field towards the woods line. The woods were about 100 feet away when my cousin noticed a guy standing next to a tree. I didn't have my glasses at the time, so I didn't notice him, and when she said there was a guy, I asked where, and so she pointed to him. I still didn't notice him, but she started running, so I followed, not wanting to be an idiot like in the horror movies. We made it back inside, and she said once she started pointing, he started walking towards us, so she ran. He was wearing all black with brown reflector-like things. It's scary because where we saw him wasn't even close to half a mile away from our house. So, scary guy in the woods, let's not meet again. Ever. Woman watching us camp. When we were teenagers, my friends and I would go out and explore, do dumb things, and basically just be kids. We have a lot of odd experiences and stories that I plan to tell, but this is just one. So during the summer when I was 17, I and 3 other friends decided to go on a camping trip. I'll call those friends Tia, Jean, and Aria. We didn't want to go to an actual established campground because we weren't trying to spend a bunch of money, and we just liked creepiness overall. Aria lived near the woods anyway, so we decided to go deep into them and camp there. We wanted to go for the weekend. A fun thing that we did splurge on was a huge tent that could easily fit all 4 of us and probably another person if we tried. Now the first night was fun and simple. We did the typical roasting marshmallows and told stories, not exclusively spooky ones, but past experiences too. Tia was the first to turn in, and she did so early because she had been working late the night before. Nobody had a problem with it. A few hours later, like 2 Amish, I think, it was Jean and Aria awake. I had gone to bed second, but I woke up to Tia shaking me awake and looking distressed. She said something along the lines of hearing jostling outside the tent, but further behind it, so not where Aria and Jean would have been. She didn't suspect anything malicious, she immediately thought it was a bear. This part of the story is a little lost to me as I was half asleep, so I'll just tell it how my friends did. I peeked out of the tent to investigate, as if that would help. The noise was supposed to be behind us, and I saw Jean and Aria frozen, scared. They were looking behind the tent. Aria noticed my groggy head emerging from the tent, and she shook her head and put her finger over her mouth, telling me to be quiet. Aria whispered something to Jean, and they both ran into the tent, shaken. This is where I start to wake up a bit more. Tia explains her side of the story to them, and they say that they saw a woman in the distance looking at them, but she was trying not to be seen. Apparently once she noticed they saw her, she took off in the other direction. All being scared now, we decided to sleep in shifts. This worked up until it was Aria's turn, and she passed out. The next morning when we all stepped out, we decided to look around as a group. We saw nothing out of the ordinary. Being spooked, we all agreed that we didn't want to camp out there anymore. So we decided to just spend the rest of the weekend at Aria's. But, as we were emerging from the woods, we saw a middle-aged woman with blonde hair walking down the road. She caught a glimpse of us and quickly turned her head away and started to walk faster. We just looked at each other. I think it was me who asked if that's what the woman looked like. Aria and Jean said they couldn't really see specific features in the dark, but she was about that height. I just wonder if she had any malicious intent or what her point of view was. Either way, I only ever camp on established grounds now. An encounter in the mountains of Idaho. This is a story that was told to me by one of my firearms instructors named Chris. In northern Idaho, deep in the Rocky Mountains, there is a cabin that runs a cattle ranch. Chris's brother knows the owner and invited Chris to spend a weekend up there for some hunting and hiking. The brothers gathered their supplies and a few of their best pals and took off to the mountains. As they were driving up the winding Idaho roads, his brother issued a cryptic warning. Sometimes the cattle escape into the woods and need to be tracked down. The owner of the ranch has seen strange creatures in the forest. I'm not messing around. Everyone laughed and didn't take the warning seriously. Within the hour they arrived at the cabin. On the second day in the mountains, Chris decided to go on an afternoon hunt with one of his friends. They drove down a back road into the forest until it ended a few miles from the cabin. They got out and walked to the nearby creek, then split off with one person going upstream and one person going downstream. After walking for a ways, Chris came to a silty deposit where he noticed a foul odor and a broken pine tree that was green and healthy. The trunk was snapped in the direction of the water. There were 4-finger indentations in the tree bark, like it had been squeezed and pulled down by a massive hand. Sap bubbled from the compressed bark. On the ground he discovered numerous huge footprints with 5 toes stamped into the silt. He followed them and counted 73 beautiful tracks that lead to another snapped green pine tree. This tree also had big finger marks on it and was facing in the direction of the water. Tracks danced all around this tree. The smell was now overwhelming. Chris became so spooked that he immediately ran back to the truck. His friend had shot a deer, and they quickly drove back to the cabin with it. At the cabin, Chris explained the situation to everyone. That night, 6 men from the cabin armed themselves, each with a rifle and a pistol, and returned by truck to the end of the dirt road. They parked the truck facing the creek and then walked on foot to the edge of the water. It was a moonless, starry night, but the horrible smell still lingered. The band of hunters waited, and at one point held into the night, calling for the creature. Chris thought he could hear something moving in the forest, but the creek was too loud to be sure. He decided to walk alone upstream and into the woods to get a clearer sound. He could hear that there was definitely something big making its way through the pines. He ran back to the hunters and warned them that something was approaching. Moments later, from both upstream and downstream, they began to hear branches snapping and footsteps thudding. The sounds came from both directions, closing in on the group. The footsteps grew louder and louder until the booming crunch of a log under the surface of the mud spooked them so much that they all ran back to the truck. In less than 2 minutes, they made it back to the vehicle. The moment they fired up the truck and turned on the headlights, they could see 2 massive, bipedal, hairy creatures moving up the creek in the location they had just retreated from. The creatures' eyes shined from the truck's headlights. All of the men had clear shots, but all took flight back to the cabin in terror. The stench greeted them upon their return. They feared that with the slain deer outside, the creatures would be drawn to the property. They all slept curled up with their guns that night, but no more signs of the creatures would be found. "I told you, little brother, I was not ducking around." He figures he ran into a family of them. There was a wild look in his eyes as he turned to me and said, "I know they exist. Never let your dog explore the forest alone." It was a Sunday, early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm that I enjoy going to because I get to see my dog. Her name is Molly. She's a mutt, but she's not a tiny dog by any means. At that time I felt very safe around her and would often take her for walks in a forest that was nearby. The day started off like any other. I and my dad got in the car, drove around for a while, and arrived at the farm. I immediately got out of the car and hugged Molly. My parents always got angry when I hugged her, since I'd smell like her for the rest of the day. I put her leash on and asked my dad if I could take her for a walk. He always thought that we would just go down a road and back, but I always found it more fascinating to take her to the forest. I always felt a certain kind of peace and relaxation there that was unmatched by anything else. So we took a turn and headed to the forest. Usually when we got there, I'd take her leash off, so she could explore on her own. Most of the time I'd carve my name into the trees or look for anything interesting. I was playing baseball with some rocks and a wooden leg, presumably from an old table, and then I heard it. Molly was barking at something. This wasn't usual when we were in the forest. I thought it was a fox or some other animal, so I quickly grabbed the wooden leg like a weapon. I knew that if it was a fox, I wouldn't attack it, but I had a sense of security while I was holding it. I called out, "Molly! Molly!" But she just kept barking. This was very strange for me since she always came to me when I called her. I followed the sound of her barks and stumbled across a scene I'll never forget. There was a man, probably in his late 50s, half naked, carrying a large machete in one hand and holding moonshine in the other. This was the first time that I stumbled across someone in the woods, let alone someone half naked and carrying a big-ass machete. He was completely ignoring Molly and hacking away at the ground for some reason. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. Even now I have no idea how I would handle it. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked in confusion. I don't think I understood the seriousness of the situation at the time. He turned around, revealing his face. He had some of the clearest blue eyes I have ever seen to this day. I could see them so well because they were open wide. "Come here, boy, look what I've dug up." I was afraid that if I didn't listen to him, he would start chasing after me, and that was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I got closer but kept a good distance. I didn't see anything, except for an empty hole. He returned to hitting the ground with his machete, occasionally taking sips from the bottle. I used this window of time to get my dog and started walking away slowly so as not to notify him that I was leaving. But then I took one final glance at the man. His head was dug deep in the hole. I was intrigued, so I kept looking. I know, how stupid of me. He finally got up from the ground. I was shocked when I saw him carrying a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what animal it belonged to, if it even did belong to an animal. I had seen enough and started sprinting with my dog. As we ran, I heard him laughing, and then I saw something flying from the corner of my eye. It was that damn machete. I heard him yell, "Damn it." This made me run even faster. I know the forest very well, so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I ripped through branches and bushes until I got out of that forest, but I didn't stop sprinting till I arrived at the garage, where my father was testing out lights on our tractor. I didn't tell him a single thing about the man, since I was afraid that he'd get frustrated and wouldn't allow me to walk Molly anymore. Needless to say, I never went to that forest alone ever again. Man with a machete and a bone in his mouth, let's not meet again. The stranger in the field. There's a field near my house I've walked through nearly every day for years. It's not remarkable, just an open stretch of grass surrounded by a thin line of trees. It connects the edge of town to a nearby hiking trail, and it's always been quiet and peaceful. Until last week. It started with a glimpse of something unusual. As I was walking home from the trail at dusk, I noticed a figure standing near the center of the field. They were far away, just a dark outline against the fading light. I thought it was strange, no one ever hangs out in the field, especially at that time of day. Most people stick to the paths or the main road. The figure didn't move, and after a moment, I convinced myself it was just a farmer or someone passing through. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Their posture was stiff, unnatural, like they were frozen in place. The next day, I walked the same route. The figure was still there, standing in the exact same spot, facing the same direction. This time, the sun was higher, and I could make out a bit more detail. They were wearing a long, dark coat, even though the weather was mild. Their face was turned away from me, looking toward the trees. "Hey!" I called out, more to see if they'd react than anything else. My voice carried across the empty field, but the figure didn't flinch. They just stood there, eerily still. I watched them for a minute, then continued walking, my pace a little quicker than usual. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who stands in the middle of a field for hours without moving? I joked to myself that they might be a scarecrow, but the thought didn't comfort me. The next day, I decided to check it out. I'm not normally one to investigate creepy things, but curiosity got the better of me. I headed into the field, walking directly toward the spot where the figure had been standing. But when I got there was no one. Just grass, bending gently in the breeze. I looked around, scanning the area, but it was empty. There weren't even any footprints in the soft dirt, nothing to suggest anyone had been standing there. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe someone playing a prank. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. The grass where the figure had been standing was darker, almost black, and seemed flattened in a perfect circle, like it had been burned. That night, I dreamed of the field. In the dream, I was standing where the figure had been, staring at the distant line of trees. Everything was silent. Too silent. Then, slowly, the trees began to move, their branches twisting unnaturally, as though they were reaching for me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't walk through the field again. I'd take the longer route home and stick to the main road. But as the day went on, a strange compulsion pulled me back. It was like the field was calling me, demanding my attention. When I reached the field, the figure was there again. This time, they were closer to the edge of the trees, almost hidden in the shadows. I hesitated, debating whether to keep walking or turn back. But something about them felt different. They were moving now, just slightly, their head tilted as though they were watching me. A chill ran down my spine. I stepped backward, ready to leave, but then they raised their hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed toward the trees. I don't know why, but I followed the direction they pointed. It was as though my body moved on its own, ignoring every instinct screaming at me to run. The trees were dense, the shadows deepening as I stepped into the forest. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth. I didn't see the figure anymore, but I felt them. I felt their presence, watching me and guiding me deeper into the woods. Then, after what felt like hours, I saw it. There was a clearing ahead, and in the center of it, a small wooden structure, a shed, or maybe an old hunting blind. It looked ancient, the wood warped and blackened with age. The door was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I stopped, every muscle in my body screaming at me to turn back. But before I could move, I heard it. A voice. It was faint, almost a whisper, coming from the shed. "Help me." It sounded like a child, their voice trembling and weak. My heart raced. Every logical part of me knew I shouldn't go any closer, but I couldn't just leave. What if someone was trapped in there? I approached slowly, my hands trembling as I pushed the door open. The inside was pitch black, the air cold and damp. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone in there?" The voice came again, clearer this time. "Please. Help me." I stepped inside, squinting to see in the darkness. The shed was empty, just a dirt floor and rotting wooden walls. But the voice kept calling, growing louder, echoing around me. Then, the door slammed shut. I spun around, heart pounding, but the door wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled, panic setting in, but it was as though the wood had fused together. That's when I realized the voice had stopped. The shed was silent. No, not silent. I could hear something, a faint sound, like breathing. Slow, deep breaths, coming from behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But I felt it. Something was there, standing just inches away, its breath hot against the back of my neck. It didn't say anything. It just stood there, waiting. I don't know how long I stood frozen in that shed, but eventually, the door creaked open on its own. The field was just outside, bathed in moonlight, as if nothing had happened. I ran. I didn't look back, not even once. I haven't gone near the field since, but I see it from my window every night, and now, whenever I look out, the figure is there, standing in the center of the grass, facing my house. Watching me. Waiting. Man in the woods. On a cold, pouring night, I walk outside for a smoke. I turned the porch lights on because the street lights are too far away from my house, and the moon didn't feel like showing up today. She remains hidden behind the black clouds, leaving only a lamp as a source of light. I light the cigarette, looking at the woods, trying to focus my eyes and see the woods, but with the porch light on, it was pretty much useless. I just stood there with only a sight of my roof and a part of my yard, the rest covered in darkness so deep it felt like it was radiating energy. It was coming from the woods, a big, loud thud, and then some small, indistinct noises. I got spooked, especially alone in the house, and it was pretty late. I got up and gave one last puff of the cigarette, squashing the butt on the ashtray. I turned to the woods with my hand already on the door handle, and another loud crack, sounding like a 7-foot-tall branch being split in half. I just couldn't think how that situation would happen until I saw. My eyes were more focused than ever, my body trembling but not from the cold. I couldn't move a muscle. I saw a man in the woods, his hair long and black, some torn up clothes, and something in his hand. I couldn't really see. I look away to open the door and enter my house and take one last look. The man just stood there looking at me while I locked my house door and shut the blinds in the living room. I didn't sleep much that night thinking about that situation. Every time I would think of something else, I would hear my dogs bark and would think of the man in the woods. A creepy truck deep in the forest. About 4 years ago, when my wife, then girlfriend, and I were in college, we decided late one Saturday night to go exploring in a large forest close to the university we were attending. We bought some hiking gear, some flashlights, and some bear spray, because someone had recently been killed by a bear in this forest, and drove over to one of the forest's entrances at around 9 p.m. I'm not entirely sure why we decided to go at night, probably because of the adrenaline rush and the fact that the stars would look beautiful with no light pollution, but in retrospect it was a bad decision. We drove on the main road into the forest until it turned into a gravel road, and we drove on that gravel road until it turned into a dirt road, about 30 minutes of driving into the forest total. We eventually found a narrow, dead-end drive where I could park my car. This drive was only about 30 yards long, so I decided to back my car into it so it would be easier to get out of when we left. It happened to be a new moon on this particular night, so it was pitch black this deep into the forest. We got out and walked around with flashlights for a little while, but we were starting to get creeped out by how utterly dark it was, so we decided to go back to my car to do a different kind of exploring, if you catch my drift. We figured that we would not encounter anyone as deep as we were in the forest, and the dirt road we came in on forked numerous times, creating hundreds of possible driving paths, and the drive we were parked in was one of at least 10 like it that we had already passed, so we figured it would be nearly impossible for anyone to find us. After a few minutes, when little to no clothing remained on our bodies, we both saw a rusty, beat-up pickup truck that looked to have been made at some point in the 1940s come around the corner on the dirt road that was connected to the drive we were parked in. With it being so dark, we assumed that the truck would not see us and drive by, even though we were both a little freaked out that anyone would have happened to be on the same road as us this deep in the forest. The truck drew closer and closer to our drive, and we both grew incredibly tense. Then our hearts sank when the truck turned onto our narrow, dead-end drive, thereby blocking us in, and turned its bright lights on. I looked down at my phone and became even more disturbed when I realized that not only were we in the middle of nowhere with no clothing on and no weapons, besides bear spray, but that we also had no cell service. The truck sat there just staring us down. We both sat in silence, unsure of what to do. We didn't want to make a run for it in the pitch black and with no clothing on, and we couldn't move the car because the truck was blocking us in. Then, after the longest 3 minutes of our lives, the truck backed up and continued driving down the dirt road. We immediately started the car and left the same way we came and have never gone that deep into the forest again. Gas mask man in the woods. This story is from around 5-6 years ago when I was a teenager, but I still remember it, and this is when it happened. Below me, around 20 meters or so near the bottom of the hill, stood a man wearing a black leather gas mask, some kind of military-looking jacket, and holding a long, thick torch in his hand. The torch wasn't on, and he was just crouching down in my direction towards the hill, staring straight at the ground, and from what I could tell, he wasn't doing anything at all. But then he looked up at me. I couldn't make out if he was staring directly towards me, but the cold black voids of the mask's eye sockets terrified me. I immediately nearly shit myself and leapt onto my bike. As I did, I heard heavy, rough, rapid breathing getting louder, and I rode as fast as I could for about 10 seconds before quickly looking back. He was standing still at the top of the hill, no longer chasing but just staring at me with the same cold black eyes. I never told anyone what happened, not even any of my friends, and still now, even driving past that place sends a chill down my spine. I know it's not a particularly amazing story, but it definitely scares me still. Something or someone listening to me and my friend in the middle of the woods at night. I and my friend, both 17, were on holiday at a resort in Norwich that was situated in a pretty large forest. I had been there once before, about 5 or so years ago, and on that trip I discovered a small dirt path that led into an uninhabited part of the woods. I was too scared to go very far down it when I first discovered it and sort of forgot about it. Fast forward to about 3 days ago, and I and my friend are bored and have like an hour to kill. It's about 9 at this point, and I decide that it would be fun to go on an evening cycle in the woods. My friend is a very skeptical and logical person who isn't a fan of taking risks, so she needed some convincing, but eventually we went. The path took us deep into the forest, so far that we could no longer see any of the lights from the houses around us. It also bordered some kind of field, however, this field was blocked off by a tall metal fence that was topped with barbed wire. We decided to turn back after about 30 minutes of cycling because it was getting dark and we had no torches. When we returned, we were buzzing and decided we had to do that again, but next time explore more of the path. 2 days later we decide it's a good time to explore more of the path. The sun is beginning to set, and it seems like the perfect time to set off. We begin cycling, however, this time things feel different. My friend is getting quite antsy the further down the path we go, and even I begin to get a bit freaked out. Something feels wrong, but we decide to carry on. Eventually, we come to an unexplored area. By this point, night has fallen, and it is pitch black, and come across some kind of wooden electricity box. We stare at it for a second, I try to see what's inside but decide it's futile, and we carry on. As soon as we pass that box, the off feeling becomes much worse, and I come to a stop. I ask my friend if we should play some music from a well-known TV show that we both like, as the soundtrack would match the vibe of biking through unknown woods at night. You can probably guess what TV show it is, but anyways. She says yes, so I begin trying to get the music up on my Spotify. I had no signal, but that shouldn't have been an issue since I had the album downloaded, but it just wouldn't load. I was very absorbed in trying to get it to work, but after a minute, my friend says in a nervous voice, "Is that coming from your phone?" Confused, I go silent, and then I hear it too. I can very faintly hear a song playing. The song is one that recently blew up because it was used in the TV show, and not only that, but the part that is playing is the chorus, which is not at the start of the song. I and my friend both check our phones, but neither is playing anything. We both then book it back on our bikes. When we reach the edge of the woods, we both feel the bad vibes wash away instantly. When we got home, we both immediately checked any possible way the music came from our phones. We both asked our Cerise to play that album, but they both said, "I need you to give me access to your Spotify or something like that." We also checked multiple other things, but nothing gave us an answer. We were both thoroughly freaked out, especially my friend, who is a skeptic and always disproved the many ghost stories and horror movies I'd tell her about. I'm a big horror fan. We went back to the path the next day and even went back to the exact spot. The vibes were completely gone, and we could find no trace that any other person had been there. Also, some additional information. It was about 9:30ish when we heard the music. It was completely dark out, so if someone was there, we wouldn't have been able to see them. However, we would have heard footsteps. The resort itself is close to an RAF base of some kind. The music itself sounded quite reverby and stopped pretty much as soon as we began booking it back, I think. If anyone has any kind of explanation, scientific or paranormal, that would be awesome. We looked into folklore, etc., but couldn't find any explanation of what it could be. So around July/August 2021, my city was under its second major COVID lockdown, where you were not allowed to have any guests over at your house. I had just moved back in with my parents in early July after my lease ended, and I didn't renew it. I'm in my mid-20s. My mother was a big stickler for the COVID laws, so my girlfriend was not even allowed on my big front porch. Yeah, really annoying. Okay, to the story. My girlfriend and I would often go for walks around a local creek near my house, and we were a fresh couple, so we had certain needs, if you understand. There was a hidden side path attached to the main walkway that goes through the creek we would sneak off into to relieve ourselves. Yeah, I know it's ducked up. One night at about 7 p.m., it's wintertime, so it's pitch black in this creek after about 5:30 p.m., we decided to walk to our spot, and my girlfriend was excited and decided to skip ahead of me. I was walking slowly while she was about 7 meters ahead of me. Once I turned the corner into the side area, I noticed she was on her phone, and she was acting suspiciously, checking the weather and other apps, and randomly said, "Okay, it's time for me to go home." I was sort of just like, oh, okay, she doesn't want to do anything anymore, no worries. As we started walking away, she whispered, "There's someone right behind you," and I'm like, what? I turned my head over my right shoulder, and there was a man in all black with his hoodie on, squatting and hiding in the bushes, staring at us. Where this bush is, it was on top of a ledge about 3 to 4 feet above the path, so while the man in black was squatting/crouching, our faces were basically aligned. I immediately said, "What the duck?" I was pretty caught off guard, so I said it weakly, and this man did not react at all. He didn't gasp, say hello, or excuse me, or any of the usual things a person would say if people noticed each other in the pitch black woods. He just stared at us as we walked away. I asked my girlfriend how she even noticed him, and she said when she walked down the trail before I got there, he saw the man on his phone, and as soon as she arrived, the man in the hoodie turned his phone off. We left that walkway and went up one sort of close by. Yeah, we're idiots, and as we were walking up the parallel side trail, we could see the man still hiding in the bushes staring at us. There was only a faint light from the moon. While not really scary, it was more of a creepy unexplained event. So man hiding in the creek bushes, let's not meet. Disappearing man in woods. This odd memory of mine, I've been thinking a lot about this because of the recent news of the Delphi murders, as the man I'm talking about looks similar to the first sketch, but this was 20 years ago, and that sketch is now irrelevant. When I was 12, I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. If you're not familiar with this part of Arizona, it's not what you think of when you think Oz. It's a ponderosa pine forest with mountains, and it snows in the winter. Anyway, across the street from my home was an entrance to some woods with paths. As my parents worked and I was the first one home after school, it was my responsibility to walk the dog. Usually, I would take him just inside the woods entrance so I wouldn't have to pick his crap out of the rocks that people out west cover their yards with. Usually, I was too scared to go into the actual woods, even with my dog, because he was stronger than me and didn't listen to me well when we were outside. There were other reasons I didn't like the woods: wolves, pack of wild dogs, and sometimes cattle, seriously, and, of course, I thought it was haunted. But this day, I guess I felt adventurous and took him on a walk into the woods. We went pretty deep that day and didn't see another soul because it was about 3 p.m. and people were at work. Neighborhood kids didn't really hang out back there either. Now my dog was excited by anything that moved and always wanted to greet another person, cat, or dog. But this day, on the way back, I remember him being steadfast, still pulling, walking, me along on the way back home, ignoring squirrels and trees blowing in the wind. Then, out of nowhere, a man appeared on the trail in front of me. Now, when I say out of nowhere, that's exactly what I mean. The woods there are not dense, and usually you can see people from far enough away that they don't surprise you. The man was dressed head to toe in brown and tan colors and gave a weak hey and did not make eye contact. The way he was dressed struck me because everything but the treetops was brown as there was a drought at the time. As he passed, I took a few more steps, and I turned around because he made me uneasy, and he's now behind me. But he was gone. I could see probably 50 feet of trail behind me. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to see him still. My kid brain started going. Maybe he's a ghost? No. He must be hiding. There's no way I wouldn't be able to see him immediately after passing each other. Maybe he was hiding in front of me before he came out of nowhere. Maybe that's why he's wearing all brown, to blend in. Dog didn't want to greet him like everyone else in the world. It didn't take long for my dog and me to take off running and run all the way home. Thank God I had my goofy dog, because he was pretty aloof but also protective. For all I know, maybe the disappearing woods man watched me take my dog out there every day and saw me wander in that day. I know I let my dog crap in the yard for a few months afterwards. This is around 2017 in spring or fall. I was 19 at the time, and I lived in Germany. I and my friends used to hang out at a friend's basement, smoke the good stuff, and play video games or watch movies until late at night. My best friend at the time lived just a couple houses down the street from where I lived, and usually it was the two of us riding our bikes back home. There were two routes we used to get home, one through the city and the other, the significantly shorter one, through a small forest maybe 1 kilometer, completely dark but proper forest road. That route made a 90-degree turn to cross some rails and a major unlit highway via a bridge. We only took that route when we were equipped with lights and in a group of at least 2 people, because there were a lot of boars, and you don't want to be on your own in case something happens. So one night we set out to ride home both quite stoned and maybe a couple beers in but not off the deep end. As we got close to that 90-degree turn where the road heads up the bridge, my friend, who was riding in front, suddenly braked because there was a relatively large tree lying across the road. We both took our bikes and lifted them over the tree and continued. Maybe 10 to 20 meters later we suddenly spot a fire on the side right at the junction where we had to make our turn, just the size of a small campfire. We both got a little slower as we saw the fire, and then when getting closer, we spotted 6 or 7 people around the fire forming a semicircle all facing us. All of them were wearing long white dresses or gowns with masks. Not Ku Klux like masks but rather like a sailor's hat with veils. A couple of seconds went by, we were just staring at them, and I guess they were staring at us. Then one of them moved towards us, and we started to sprint away towards the bridge on our bikes and didn't stop until we were on a well-lit road again. That's been the craziest story among me or my friends ever since, but please, people, let's not meet again. Never take the shortcut. I grew up in a small suburban town in Michigan. My parents' property bordered a state forest that was typically pretty deserted. Growing up, I was not allowed to go into those woods. By the time I was a 15-year-old girl, in the late 90s, I was far from naive. I had a job as a cashier in town, and in the summer, both my parents and my older siblings worked days, so there was no one around to give me a ride to work. If I wanted to get to my job, which started in the afternoon every day, I had to walk. If I traveled the roads, they took me out of the way and met at right angles, so it was 3 or more miles into town, but if I cut through the secluded woods and followed the train tracks into town, it was only about 2 miles and significantly cooler, a bit flatter, and with less sun. Ignoring my gut, I took the same shortcut at the same time every day. Big mistake. The shortcut was a deer trail through dense woods and rolling terrain that went on for about a mile until it intersected the train tracks, which went directly into town. By the time I got to the train tracks, I was a long way out from any houses, just woods in all directions. One day I was alone and deep in the woods on my way to work when I heard a chain jingling. I put my hands in my pockets and stopped walking. The chain jingling lasted for a brief second longer and then stopped. I couldn't tell which direction the sound was coming from because of all the little hills and the dense trees, but it sounded very close. Thinking, or perhaps just wishing, I might be imagining the sound, I tried again and started walking until I heard the chain jingling, then put my hands in my pockets, and I stopped walking abruptly. Again I heard the chime jingle for a second more before it stopped. I knew right then I was being stalked. The train track and thus a clearing was maybe 100 feet ahead and up a steep embankment. My instincts told me to walk fast but not to run and not to look behind me. I sensed that there was someone immediately behind me, but my heart was racing, and I had no time to process information. I walked as fast as my little legs could go. There was no point in screaming for help, no one would have heard me. Then there was something on the trail ahead of me. Lying on the path was a page ripped from a porn magazine of a woman spread eagle. I didn't get a great look at it as I power walked over it, But later, thinking about it, I recalled the page was crisp and laid out carefully on the path facing my direction. It was not there the day before, and it was not wilted. Someone had placed it there, anticipating my arrival. They had probably been watching me for days or weeks. Further down the path were more pages set out like some sort of pornographic breadcrumb trail. I walked right past the magazine pages. Finally, I made it to the steep embankment along the tracks. I climbed for my life. When I got up to the train tracks, I ran. Only then did I look back into the woods. As I was running, in the bright sunlight now, my eyes had a hard time seeing down below into the shadows of the woods, but I saw something big move and heard twigs breaking. I just kept running. It was a good half-mile from that point to the closest road that passed over the tracks. As I got closer to town, there were more houses and people, so eventually I calmed down. I never reported the incident, and I did not tell my parents about it until years later because I thought I'd be grounded for going into the woods. I never took the shortcut again. I've always heard the human body goes into fight or flight mode when you are truly scared. Can anyone explain to me why my instincts told me not to run? A lone man with a chainsaw followed my family through the woods. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio a few weeks ago. There was a place that I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I have never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect, but I did know it was pretty deep in the woods. We took a trip from our rented cabin using Google for GPS to the location. We start driving, and it's, for lack of better words, real impoverished where we are driving/hills have eyes-esque. We literally only see a few cars on the way there and are on back roads. We get to a point where we need to enter into a forest, and we are close to the tunnel. There was a sign that said we were entering Bubblewood. For a little additional information, I drive a Mercedes that I am just lucky to have and have my husband in the car, a black man with dreadlocks, my 10-year-old nonverbal autistic son, and my 6-year-old daughter. We drive down this really creepy stone road into the forest, and there is nothing back there, no houses, no cars, nobody. We see signs that we are close and pull into the parking lot. There is a footbridge with a ton of it that people put there. We walk over the footbridge and make our way toward the tunnel, which is a lot larger than I expected. We hear this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel that goes into the woods away from the parking lot. A truck comes driving through the tunnel toward us while we are on foot. He gets out of his truck with a chainsaw, and it's a white guy in his 60s. He walks with my entire family everywhere we go and through the tunnel. I tried to make small talk with him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources, etc. He really wasn't budging. We turn around to walk out of the tunnel, and he starts using a chainsaw behind us, and the sound is just echoing through this tunnel. At this point, we have no cell phone service, and literally no one knows my family is out there except us. I was already worried my car was sending the wrong idea to people, like we have money or something. We don't. We rush to the car to get the kids in their booster seats, and this MF comes driving over the footbridge in his truck toward us in the parking lot. I honestly don't even know how his truck fit on it. He stops again and gets out of his truck and starts walking in the other direction, much to our relief. About this time, I noticed there are dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were his, and we compared his hand and my son's, and they were not a match. I don't know who could have touched the car because we were with the chainsaw man the entire time we were there. We get out of there as fast as possible. Just a few minutes later, I look in my rearview mirror, and there is a bunch of dust kicked up behind us, and there he is. He had to have driven pretty fast on the stone road to catch up to us like that. There is nowhere to go in these woods. The road is basically one lane, and we have no cell service or GPS. Every time I think we lose him, he is there again. I am waiting for my tires to get popped or something, or for this guy to ram me off the road into a ravine in the woods. Finally we get out of these woods, and I turn around, and he's still following. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in the excitement. The guy in the truck was finally gone, and I turned around to go back past the stone road that goes into the forest. There is one lone house near this road, and there is his truck, parked there. He had to have seen us drive onto this road into the woods and taken some back way to the tunnel. I don't know if he was just trying to protect the site from more graffiti or what, but he really creeped us out. It was like every scary movie trope rolled into one single event. Odd events in the forest. One day I decided I wanted to go shooting while visiting my uncle. He recommended to me some logging trails that go really deep into the woods where he used to go shooting as a kid. I decide I would go there and check them out and do some shooting. I decide to go to the gas station and fill up, and while I'm filling up, I notice this cool car. This will be important later. I see them leave, and I leave a little after them. I find the road I want to take and turn off. I go about 10 miles as the crow flies up the various logging roads and find a nice spot with a backdrop to shoot into. I grab my gun, targets, and extra ammo and walk down the opening. As I'm walking, I notice the wildlife gets quiet, and I hear something whistle a certain pattern. I pause and listen to it. It whistles a different pattern this time. I whistle at it with a new pattern, and it copies me. I do this a couple of times, seeing if it will copy me, and it does. Until it whistles something different. I also heard walking in the bushes, and it was close. I'm a little freaked out, so I slapped my bolt release to load a round into my gun and walked back to my vehicle. I put my gun on the floor next to me and get out of there. As I'm going down the road, I see the cool car I saw from the gas station. I stop and notice they are stopped, and the guy on the passenger side is out of the car messing and struggling with something on the ground, and the driver is staring at me. I said hi, and he just stared at me. I said, "Have a good day," and he just kind of mumbled and acted strange. They never saw my gun, so I don't think that's why they were acting weird. So I left. About an hour goes by, and I find a different spot to shoot, did that for an hour, cleaned up, and left. As I'm leaving, I see them again. It was just an odd experience. I don't think they were the thing or person whistling at me in the woods. I saw them at a different place and time from when the whistling happened. I also don't think it was a bird. The whistling sounded like it was coming from something bigger. I could also hear the air leaving the mouth of whatever was whistling. Just an odd experience, and I wanted to share. The accounts of this story are true and were experienced by myself and 4 friends in the deep woods of north-central Minnesota. In June of 2017, 4 friends and I had decided to take a trip to northern Minnesota for a week. We had Airbnb'd a cabin on a lake far away from other cabins as we wanted to get away from people and just enjoy our vacation. This event is like something straight out of a cabin in the woods kind of story. The nearest town was 15 miles away and had a population of around 130 people. There was a holiday gas station that sold some groceries and lots of fishing gear and beer. Being 23 years old, we all loaded up on beer and cheap hot dogs. The cabin was alright, there were definitely some creepy aspects about it. In the living room were troll dolls under glass, which immediately gave me the creeps, as it would most people. The first day was fine, we grilled, drank, and smoked cigars like we were kings. On day 2, we went to a bigger city and bought lots of actual groceries for the week. The night of day 2, though some sketchy, creepy things started to happen, my friend and his girlfriend had gone to bed, and us 3 remaining friends decided to stay up for a bit. Around 11 p.m. we had started to hear what sounded like a woman laughing outside in the backyard of the cabin. This was spooky, but being on a lake, sound can travel a long way, so I didn't let it bother me too much. It was when we started seeing what looked like lights in the woods that I started to lose my cool. Now I am certain we were the only ones on that side of the lake, and this cabin was down a trail that led from the main road to the cabin. This trail was probably 1/4 mile or better long and had a real spooky looking cabin full of boxes and bicycles along this trail. So we knew that there was no way that anyone was over on our side of the lake. Next thing we knew, the laughing turned to what sounded like muffled words spoken by a woman who smoked for 40 years. That definitely got all 3 of us spooked enough that we were becoming a little panicked as the van we drove was 2WD, and it had been raining all day and night. The trail had a pretty steep grade leading down to the cabin, and I knew this thing would not make it up the hill even if we had to make a run for it. Now I'm not scared easily. I've been camping and hiking in northern Minnesota since I was a young boy. I can handle myself in the woods, but this was not just some bear or wolf in the woods, this was something that I've never heard before. At this point, it was probably 1 in the morning. We had our eyes glued to the windows that overlooked the lake. The moon had come out after the rain had stopped, so there was this eerie glow that gave the pines an eerie look. My friend and I were looking outside. The other friend was so freaked out he was basically lying on the couch with his eyes closed. We heard what sounded like a kayak being tipped over, and I quickly flipped on what I thought was the outside porch light but was the light for the living room. With the lights off in the living room, we had a much better view of outside, and I saw what I can only describe as an 8 to 12 feet tall, lanky, black figure with unnaturally long arms walking across the yard against the backdrop of the moonlit lake. Without even thinking, I flipped the living room light on, and my friend, who was looking outside with me, said, turn the light off, so I did, and I asked him, dude, please tell me you didn't see what I saw. He said he saw what I saw, and we immediately started swearing and shaking, not just shivering, shaking, but proper trembling. My friend quickly ran to his bag and grabbed his 9mm that he has a concealed carry for and said, if this thing comes after us, I'm going to shoot it. At that point, I only had a knife, which I had a death grip on. I started to become angry. As you know, this was a vacation. We came here to have fun and just enjoy life. I remember telling my friends, if this thing is going to come after us, I'd rather see it coming and face it than stay hiding in this cabin just waiting for something to happen. I went out to the front porch with my knife in hand and a flashlight, made a quick scan of the tree line, and saw nothing. Soon both of my friends that were awake joined me on the deck. We had no cell phone reception up there, the Wi-Fi did not work. So if we needed to call someone, we had to stand in the corner of the deck, and maybe we could get a text message sent in less than a minute. So that's what we did. We took turns sending text messages to people we knew saying that some not so cool things were happening and we would be coming back home in the morning, which was an 8-hour drive. So until the sun started to rise, we chain-smoked cigarettes, standing on the deck basically back to back, just waiting for what we thought was the Wendigo. Now I know this is long and may not exactly sound believable, but trust me, for those of us that were there, we have not forgotten that night that we 20-something-year-old guys said that we loved each other and we would never forget that night. To this day, it's the scariest thing that's ever happened to any of us, and we've all agreed we would never go to that part of Minnesota ever again. Now to all who say this is just a story, I must tell you this, I will be the first to denounce any ghost story. I am not religious, and I don't believe that all things that go bump in the night are supernatural. But I know what I saw, and I cannot explain what I saw. Thank you. I work as a child care professional, and one of the kids that I look after had recently gotten into hiking. I decided to take him to a really cool trail in Salt Fork State Park. We were all set to hike to Hosak's Cave after parking right near the beginning of the trailhead. The entire trail is about half a mile, which is why I chose it for our hike that day. I also chose this trail because any time that I had been on it before, it was very busy and full of people in a very popular spot, which made me feel secure. However, this past summer we had a cluster of severe summer storms that caused massive damage to the trail, so to my surprise it was much more difficult and completely empty. I wasn't bothered by the trail being obviously empty because there was a small construction crew working on a bridge that was just barely visible from the trailhead. He was still up for the hike, despite the entire width of the trail being washed out until it was no more than a foot wide with a 6 to 12 foot drop off into a creek bed that is solid rock and several trees down. He is very athletic, and I was confident in his abilities if he was, and he was so excited to tackle our adventure. We made it all the way to a platform that allows you to see the entire cave. There were many downed trees surrounding the platform, and it was actually closed at this point, but we had made it this far, so we decided to maneuver around the platform and proceed the few hundred feet into the cave. We spent the most time in this area due to the difficulty, so I know exactly what it looked like. There were tree roots directly under the platform, and you could climb down either side of them. It is also worth noting that Hosak's Cave is much more like a cliff with an overhanging rock formation and a trickle of a waterfall directly in the middle. It is not a creepy closed-up cave. It is very open and beautiful. We got to the cave, and I noticed a candle that was not burning recently but had been at some point sitting on a large rock that had a heart carved into it. I chalked it up to someone having a date or something and disregarded it. He wanted to climb to the top, where I noticed 2 more candles and 3 stacks of small rocks that had been stacked up by somebody. I definitely felt weird at this point, but it was about this time that he found a small puddle full of baby salamanders and wanted to catch them. It was the happiest that I had seen him in a very long time, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that it was time to go. We spent about an hour catching baby salamanders, and I watched him have the time of his life. We finally decided to leave, and when we got to the platform, dead center in the middle of the tree roots was a wet washcloth hanging that was absolutely not there before. He noticed it as well but did not pick up on the severity of the situation that we were in. At that moment I factually knew 2 things. 1, someone was watching us, and we did not see them. And 2, they were now potentially hiding in the woods and made it a point to not be seen but to leave an object to be noticed. There was no running back with the narrow trail, and I was not about to tell him that we were in potential danger. I told him to go in front of me, and I just kept encouraging him that he was doing great over and over, and that seemed to speed him up naturally. I never saw anyone while we were on the trail. We got to the car, and I locked the doors immediately. On our way out of the park, a very dirty man, probably in his 30s, came out of the woods and made it a point to stare at me with the most empty of expressions that I have ever seen. The man followed me with his eyes and head as I drove by him and continued to stare at me until I couldn't see him anymore. I knew the third fact at that point. He made it a point to make himself apparent to me and that facts 1 and 2 were true. That stare stuck with me for days, and I considered counseling after this as it bothered me for several weeks, causing me severe anxiety. I tried to tell myself that maybe we just interrupted his bath time, and he was camping and didn't want to startle us. After all, the crazy-looking man had ample time to do anything that he wanted while we were catching salamanders. I just cannot in any way rationalize why he stared into my eyes the way that he did if he wanted to go unnoticed. Deep down I know that it is much more likely that it was a deliberate action intended to scare me. He never had any idea how panicked I was, and to this day, it is the most fun that I have ever seen him have. He brings it up regularly, and it was a very positive experience for him. It was one of my worst experiences ever, and it made me feel so sick and disturbed. Creepy encounter. I didn't realize it was creepy. When I was 13-14, my mother's friend asked if I would like to babysit her kids for a few hours one night. I live in a rural town, and to get to their house you have to drive to the outskirts of the town, about 15 minutes up a steep and narrow hill, surrounded by forest. Their house was just off the road. Now if you pass their house, the road continues up into the mountains and forest and eventually starts heading down the other side and onto a main road, where you can turn right and head back to the town. This is a substantially longer route if you want to head back to town. Also pitch black as you're driving through woods. I was so excited and felt grown up enough to babysit. Mum's friend was lovely, and her husband was a police officer. My dad dropped me off, and Mum's friend was going to give me a lift home. I was there for a few hours, 11 p.m. or so, and all went well. When they returned, the mother said her husband, police officer, was going to drive me home. As we started off, he didn't turn right. Back down the road. The way we had come. He turned left, heading up the mountain and into the forest. I asked him, "Why are we going this way?" He replied, "It's just another way." Those were the only words he spoke to me. We sat in silence. He drove slowly deeper into the forest. When I said it was a longer route, I meant a 45-minute drive instead of 15. I thought it was weird, but I was a naive and innocent kid. At one point I asked him if we were nearly there yet. No answer. I remember thinking maybe they had an argument, as they were pretty cold with each other when they got home. He did drop me off home. I also take a secret pleasure in being the white trash warrior my dad always hoped I'd be. I always hated the feeling of claustrophobia that came with being female in the city. Avoiding eye contact, not walking alone at night. When you're a girl alone out in the woods, you're in charge. You're safe within the warm embrace of your own solitary freedom. Or so I thought. I spent a few hours on the roads, the surroundings getting wilder and wilder as I drove. I parked in an allowed roadside ditch, and with a compass and a map, hiked until I was in a mile's reach or so of some good ice fishing. I was at least 4 miles from the road. I made an extremely discreet camp in a clearing, with just one little hole in the snow for my tiny tent and my tiny campfire. After a couple of beautiful days of just hiking and relaxing around camp, I made the trek to the fishing hole. Everything was in utter winter stillness. The air was crisp, and the only signs that I wasn't in a perfect vacuum were the twitterings of birds and the very distant rumblings of the half-frozen waterfalls. After a mile or so of crunching along in the snow, I silently celebrated my compass skills when I came out at the exact place I had intended to. I punched a hole in the thin crust of ice and set to getting my fish on. My first catch came quickly, after a few weeks under a frozen surface. Fish are hungry and shit. I was feeling oddly fatigued and jumpy, so I decided to just clean the fish here and now and take it straight back to camp to cook. Yummy. I quickly realized my fish preparation skills were rusty at best. I cursed my lack of preparation as I cut myself for the second time. Something in my peripheral senses was irritating me, but I was very set in my task, focusing on the motions in the slippery mess. The thing in the periphery was growing more irritating, like the buzzing of a fly or the yammering of a sibling. I carved and hacked and sliced my hand open freshly as the fish slipped out of my hands and into the snow. Frustrated, I shouted, "Duck off with that whistling, will you?" Silence resumed. And then my heart stopped. Living in a college neighborhood, I had grown so accustomed to white noise that I had failed to recognize how grossly inappropriate this sound was in this context. The silence weighed down on me as I broke into a sweat. The only reason a human would be this deep in the woods is to hunt, and no hunter would give himself away like that. And if he was whistling for any other reason, shouldn't he have reacted to my outburst? Yelled something vulgar back? Apologized? No. Nothing. Just the total stillness of the woods. Silence as pure as it was before I spoke. Unsure if I had misheard the twitterings of a bird or something, I just decided the fish was a lost cause, slung my gear over my shoulder, and headed for camp. I trudged off into the woods, and about a quarter mile from camp, I saw a large mass protruding from the snow. Apprehensive but drawn, like a moth to the flame, I trudged up to what materialized in the closing distance as a moose kill. A really, really good moose kill. A clean shot through the upturned eye, staring at me. Staring at me and saying something. Saying something that was imposing a sense of dread on me, but a dread I couldn't translate. I ran. I ran hard, and I ran fast. In the snow and the woods, everything looked the same. I knew I was moving south, and I knew I'd passed camp on the east. I made for the road, eventually slowing down to a weary trudge, calming at the comforting sight of the woods clearing ahead to make way for the country roadway. I looked to my left and saw my car 50 yards or so down, jogged to it, and drove the lonely 15 miles to the first motel I saw signs for. I had none of my belongings and no earthly idea why I had just abandoned ship like that. It was only as I was sitting up watching infomercials that night that it started to fall together. Why would the Park Service issue free camp passes for the same stretch of woods that they allowed hunting? The moose defied everything of my rudimentary understanding of hunting. Even with the snow cooling, decomp starts quickly on an animal that size. You'd have time for a few quick pictures, but you'd want to have it dressed quickly. Why would you kill a moose 5 miles into the forest? How could you ever drag it back to the road? In the morning, in a sleep-deprived and paranoid state, I described everything I'd seen and thought I'd heard to a very confused park ranger. He seemed more vexed about illegal hunting than any of my crazy city girl ramblings. He said he wanted to come pick me up and have me take him to where I thought the kill site was. I said I was only going if he brought a gun. He sighed with exasperation and told me when to meet him. We rode out into the woods on an ATV, with me awkwardly riding on the back as if on the back of the world's awkwardest motorcycle. We got to a large impression in the snow where the moose had been. Blood was everywhere. There was also the distinct track of the carcass being dragged. The drag marks made a smooth trail in the snow, as if the carcass were on a tarp. The ranger said he should take me back now. He asked where my camp was. I pointed in the direction of the drag marks. It looked like he was finally sharing in my unease. Back at the hotel, I washed my clothes in the sink and prepared to drive home in the morning. An unknown number called my phone. It was the park ranger. The moose had been dragged to my campsite. He described the scene as a huge mess. He wasn't sure if an animal had helped to make the mess, but one thing was clear. Someone had cut into my tent with a knife. I asked about the rest of my belongings. He said darkly, "You don't want them back. They're covered in moose mess." So, what happens now? Well, miss, we're just going to keep an eye out for this guy. I haven't heard of or seen anything like this ever before. I'm really sorry this happened. And that was it. No closure. No explanation. In the years that have passed, I've tried every different application of reason. A hunter who needed help but knew I was already gone? A deranged psychopath looking to make his second kill? One of the few friends I shared the story with envisioned him as some deep wood Sweeney Todd. He dubbed him Moosey Todd. I still don't know why I didn't hear the gunshot. The whistling seems so vivid in my memory, but was it even real? One question has been definitely answered. I'll never go into the woods alone again. Do you ever get a sinking feeling of impending danger? Because I did in the backwoods around Sulham Hill, Berkshire, UK. Just a feeling that the vibe of a place is completely rotten when moments ago it was almost idyllic. I've got the weekend to myself, as my partner is away for a few days. Something I like to do is go for night drives and stop by somewhere in the sticks and go for a peaceful walk when not too many people are around. So I get in the car and put in the directions to a little car park in some woods about 10 miles out. As I drive down the motorway, the sun's very nearly set. It looks great, everything bathed in orange. I leave at the junction, and the motorway becomes a dual carriageway, which in turn becomes a single B road. I turn off onto the lane and pass through the last village before a nice bit of hilly conifer woodland looms large in the twilight. I was going here particularly because I heard there was a nice viewpoint of Reading Town. I don't make it that far. Now I'm going up country tracks, single lane only, so I'll have to pull over to let someone past if they're going the other way. That doesn't happen. No one else is on the road. The hedgerows give way to woodland. It's very pretty, and I can still hear birdsong in the dying light. Eventually I reach the car park, although really it's just a patch of gravel for turning around, and a forestry commission gate blocks off the dirt track deeper into the woods. In the car park there's a motorhome, although it looks like no one's in it. There's also a dark blue Ford Fiesta EcoBoost with a fella in it on his phone. I park in the corner, behind the motorhome and 2 spaces over from the Ford, and I get out. There's a meadow across the road from the car park, so I walk to that to see if there's a path that may lead to the viewpoint. I've not been here before. No viewpoint, but a single deer. Nice. After that, I cross over again and decide to use the track behind the forestry gate. Even if I don't find the viewpoint, it will be a really nice walk, I think, and I begin walking. The man in the little car isn't on his phone anymore. He gets out. I take a few more steps, but I'm already feeling a creeping dread. I look over at the man. There's now a second man, and the pair of them are dressed in dark, practical clothes with boots. They're very tall. They don't say anything to each other. Their faces are made of stone. I've stopped now. I pretend to be on my phone. I try not to look directly, but out of my peripheral vision, I catch them taking turns to sneak looks at me. So I look at them directly, and one is just watching me as they walk towards the same path I was about to head down. I just stand there as they walk by, and they keep looking at me in alternation, even turning their heads as they're in front of me now to look at what I'm doing. They disappear behind some hedges, looking at me one more time before they go. The dread feeling, the rotten feeling, is very strong. I've had this danger feeling only twice before. One time the danger was perceived, the other time, very immediate. At this point, I decide absolutely not and go straight back to my car and get in. I can see the men again. From the car I can see around the bushes, and they're just standing there, watching me. The entire time I got ready and drove out of the car park, turning onto the road, they're just stood there, watching. I hope I was just being paranoid, but I know the difference deep down. Paranoia makes you jump at your own shadow and feel anxious. This feeling was cold and a solid feeling in my gut. You become hyper-aware of your surroundings but also the object of your dread, in this case the men. I just had a terrible feeling about them, unlike any other stranger I had come across. In the backwoods of Alabama, someone followed me for miles. Around 2007, I was getting my PhD at the University of Florida. I lived in a condo in Gainesville, which I owned on my own, at the age of 30ish. I had a friend who was walking across the United States. We'll call him Captain. Captain decided to spend the winter at my house, so he got a mutual friend to drive him from Alabama, where he had last stopped walking, to my house in Gainesville. We had a pleasant Thanksgiving, and then Captain just kind of chilled at my house for the next several months. It wasn't too big of a deal because I was mostly staying at my boyfriend's house, but it was a little bit much. When it was time for him to get back to walking, he asked if I would drive him back to the exact location he had left in Alabama. Looking forward to having my house back, I agreed to drive him one day when I was out of school. I don't remember what route we took or where it was, but I remember that the drive wasn't that long, relatively speaking. It seems like it should have been, but I guess it was about 5 to 6 hours, one way. I dropped him off in the early evening and headed back for Florida. This meant that I was driving at night, by myself, in an unknown part of the country. Conveniently, the GPS technology that we had at the time gave me this extremely backwards route back to Florida. To get to where I had dropped off Captain, we stayed on the freeway for most of the time, and then it was about 10 miles off the freeway. Well, Google Maps, or whatever the app was, decided that the faster way was to take me on all of these little back roads through Alabama backcountry. Serious Deliverance vibes. Seriously. So I'm already a little freaked out and occasionally checking in with my boyfriend to let him know where I am. I've driven at night alone tons, but my history with respect to strangers has made me hypervigilant. At some point I became aware that there was a car behind me. I didn't assume that was anything weird until the car stayed with me for several miles. Again, I just shoved it off to maybe Google Maps giving them the same weird route. But, because I was paying attention to the car behind me, I didn't notice when I pulled through some small town that I was taking a left at the wrong intersection. There were two intersections very close together, and I was accidentally in the left lane to turn left at the intersection before the one I was supposed to turn at. No biggie, I figured, it's like 2 in the morning. So when the light changed, I drove straight through the intersection and took a left at the next intersection. The car behind me did the same thing. I realized at that point that I was definitely being followed. I immediately called my boyfriend and asked him to look up the non-emergency police number for the area where I was. I tried to give him my nearest location. But like any dude who has never been the victim of any kind of assault, he thought I was overreacting. He was in the middle of something and therefore didn't look up the number for me. In retrospect, I should have absolutely just called 911. But I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could have been nothing. But that nothing was quickly becoming something indeed. Because I'd been on back roads in Alabama without a gas station for a long time and my car was in need of gas. That meant that I would have to exit the vehicle at a gas station that was probably not well manned at this time of night, by myself. I was low-key freaking out. It didn't help that I couldn't see the driver of the car behind me. It was dark, and the car had dark tinted windows. Also, Alabama backwoods roads are pretty damn dark. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't get a glimpse of the driver. I honestly could not figure out why this person targeted me, and at first I had laughed it off as some kind of Southern football vendetta. I had a UF license plate frame, Go Gators, and was trying to convince myself that this person was just trying to scare me because they liked one of our rival schools. Given that I am a tall woman, It may have been difficult to identify that I was a woman in the car. But either way, this person was clearly following me, and given that I had to stop my car, I was feeling increasingly at risk. Finally, my backwards woods route took me to a relatively larger metropolitan area. I was finally on streets with streetlights, and businesses were still lit up. I started to feel safer. But I still had to stop for gas. I had already made a plan as far as that was concerned, but I wanted the guy behind me to know that I was onto him. So at the first intersection that was well lit, I turned fully around in my car seat and stared at him while pretending to talk on the phone. I did this for the entire time the light was red. I wanted it to look like I was describing his car and his features to whoever was on the phone. Not long after this, I found a gas station that was well lit up. I was driving on fumes and praying that I wouldn't run out of gas in backwoods Alabama. I pulled into the gas station so that my driver's side door was adjacent to the door of the gas station, jumped out, and ran inside. I let the attendant know that I was being followed. And he walked out from behind the counter and walked to the windows and said that no one was there. I was sure that the car had been behind me when I pulled into the station, but seeing that I ran inside, they must have driven off. I still have no idea what the guy's intention was, but he followed me for easily an hour and a half. Like 100 miles. It felt predatory as hell. Thankfully, I was able to gas up my car under the watchful eye of the gas station attendant, and the attendant told me the quickest way to the freeway. My trip was uneventful after that. But I was still shaking and thoroughly pissed at my boyfriend for not taking me seriously. Stay safe out there. I live in a small town in South Africa. Near my town there is a large patch of woods, and since the outbreak, I haven't been in the woods for a long time. Until yesterday. So my friend called me to ask if I wanted to join him and a few other mates to play a game of paintball in the woods, and obviously I was keen. I got my paintball gear and gun and headed off to my mate's place. There were 6 of us: Chase, Liam, Matt, Joey, Steven, and obviously me. We headed off to the woods but made a few stops to fill up on petrol and get some gas for the paintball guns. When we finally got to the woods, we parked the cars, got in our gear, and ventured out in the forest to find the perfect spot to paintball. Eventually we got deep enough into an area with sufficient cover and space to play a good game of capture the flag. We played a couple of games, and since it's winter, it got dark really quickly, but we planned for this and brought our flashlights and decided to play a couple of night games, which is extremely hard, especially in the forest we were in. During one match, Joey and I decided to sit out because we were both tired and just needed a quick breather, and the others continued to play from a significantly good distance away from us. While we were chilling, I was rolling up a joint. Yes, I'm a pothead, and Joey went to go take a piss a couple of meters away from me. While I was busy rolling, I had the flashlight pointing towards myself since there was no other light to allow me to see what I was doing, and around me, it was completely dark. I couldn't even see 2 meters ahead of myself because of how pitch black it was. Suddenly I heard footsteps coming my way, but I thought it was Joey, and I soon realized I couldn't see any light from his flashlight, so now I was more vigilant but still relaxed, thinking he was trying to play a prank on me or something. But the footsteps stopped a few meters away from me, so I lifted up my flashlight and pointed it in the direction where I heard the footsteps and scanned the area, but I just saw bushes and trees, and I just thought it might be Joey hiding in the bushes or behind a tree waiting to give me a jump scare, and then I heard footsteps coming in the opposite direction, and when I looked, I could see it was Joey because he was holding his flashlight. That's when I stopped what I was doing and picked up my flashlight and paintball gun, and when Joey reached me, I whispered, "Bro, I think there is someone over there," and Joey obviously didn't believe me and just said to me to stop being a baby, but he soon regretted saying that because I decided to do one last scan of where I heard the footsteps, and to my horror, I saw someone peeking and staring right at me from behind a tree probably 10 or 11 meters away from us. I just shouted, "What the actual duck?" And when Joey heard me say this, he looked at me and then where the man looked and instantly jumped up, picking up his paintball gun also. We stared at each other for at least 2 minutes, but it felt like forever until he stepped out from behind the tree. He was a large man, at least 6 feet, who was honestly filthy, like he hadn't taken a bath in years. He was wearing baggy, ripped up jeans and just an old, dirty, zipped up bomber jacket, plus we could see that he was on something, or he was just batshit crazy, and he was holding something behind his back. He finally said, "What are you guys doing out here when it's so dark?" We couldn't even answer him because of the shock we were in. Joey stuttered with fear in his voice, "We were just leaving," but the man nodded his head in disagreement and said, "No, you're not, your friends are still playing the game." I felt a shiver down my spine. "How about we play a game of our own while we wait for your friends?" And that is when he finally showed us what he was hiding behind his back, and it was a large machete. That's when I knew we had to get out of there. So I aimed my paintball gun, and in the toughest way I could muster up, I told him, "Leave now or I will shoot," even though I only had about 6 or 7 paintballs loaded, and Joey did the exact same by aiming his gun at the man even though he had no paintballs in his gun, but he didn't even flinch but did something that honestly made my skin crawl. He just smiled and said, "The game starts now," and suddenly he just rushed at us, so I told Joey to run while I fired up my last bullets at him, and luckily I shot him in his head, which caused him to fall, so that was our chance to book it and link up with our other friends. As soon as we started running, we heard his footsteps again, and he was actually gaining on us again. We could barely see, but we couldn't slow down because we knew what would happen if we did, so we just carried on sprinting our hearts out until we heard other paintball guns being fired, so we knew we were close. Joey started shouting to get everyone's attention, and all of a sudden, I heard a huge thud. Joey tripped and twisted his ankle. I turned around to help him up, and when I did, I could see the man running full sprint towards us. In that moment I thought it was going to be the end for us, but our friends heard our screams for help and rushed to us, and when they saw the man, they just started firing at him, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to take us all on, and he decided to turn around and disappear into the forest. We helped Joey up, rushed to get our stuff, and rushed to the cars. When we got to my friend's place, we helped Joey treat his ankle, and I proceeded to tell my friends everything that happened, and they were all creeped out. It's safe to say that the next time I'm in those woods, I will be more vigilant. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It is about 166 miles long and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forests from Roanoke County to Pearisburg in Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October, and the changing of the leaves and colors was amazing. The air was crisp and cool. Perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful. Just your typical hike. But our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you are supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. We decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around, and we found a spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m. I was awoken by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun. Someone is outside walking around our tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and then we sat silently listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard it. Snap, crunch, snap, someone, or something walking in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had gone out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away so as to not give away that I was out of the tent and have it become a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear more noises. After a few minutes, snap, crunch, crack. It sounded like it was bipedal based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and then, from the original spot, I hear who or whatever was there take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened, and I end up sitting guard outside the tent, in the darkness, until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out, as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point we were pretty deep in and still had 2 days left. That day we walked a little faster than normal and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911, and I kept the judge right next to me, and I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, I drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point I guess my exhaustion caught up with me and I drifted off. I awoke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them something along the lines of "We are armed, get the duck out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. They had scattered our belongings everywhere. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction whoever was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking off in the woods and hearing branches snap for quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long way from anywhere and quite literally on our own, since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we had been out there. I really felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up, and there was barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again. But my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us? Maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out. Daytime encounter in an empty forest. I'd like to begin by describing myself, because I believe it's relevant to the story. I have to assume that I'm not the average author here. I'm 25, male, and a bit above average height. I have been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week since I've graduated high school: gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My favorite hobbies are mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I've just recently purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots because it's near the end of the summer season and they were on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few ascents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature with many trails and opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my boots last Saturday, more specifically because it would have been my granddad's birthday, and he also loved hiking before he died. These boots are overkill for these woods, but I needed to try them. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just the day before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people, as they are easily scared off by the weather. Since the summer was excruciatingly hot, it was a nice change of temperature, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. In the not-so-distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me on this hike, but she's turning 14 this year, and she doesn't enjoy long-distance walks anymore. My girlfriend had to do something for work on short notice, so I knew from the moment I woke up I would be doing the hike alone. The first half of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference along the trail is minimal. I barely broke a sweat, and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met at most 6 to 7 people during the first 2 to 3 hours, and most of them were cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped on many occasions to take pictures or study some animals' tracks. There are deer and wild boars in these woods, nothing more menacing, not animals anyway, but I won't get ahead of myself. Between 12 and 1 the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest, it can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest, so cars seldom go here. My trail required me to take this road for a few hundred meters. As I was walking along the road, I heard a car approach from behind me. It went past me, not too quickly or too slowly. It was an older, green SUV with a fresh registration, you can tell by the license plate. It was likely an import. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it come back. It drove past me for the second time, now very slowly, and I could clearly see two men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. Both had stubble/beard game going on as well. I assumed they were gamekeepers, even though those cars have a crest on the hood and on both front doors. As I hike a fair amount, I know these things, I see them around quite a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this, they have Jeeps, which are more suitable for the forest. Still, I felt no discomfort, and again, I thought nothing of it. Then, my trail left the asphalt road and began snaking in the woods again. I walked ahead serenely, gazing at trees and whatnot. Then, I suddenly had the strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. An engine sound was becoming more and more clear as well. At this point the trail was quite narrow, but if, for whatever reason, you'd want to drive a car on it, you could, just about. Now when I turned around, the aforementioned SUV was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped just as I had. I looked at the driver, who was staring back, as I can only assume, as he was wearing sunglasses. I calmly asked him, "What's wrong? Shall I let you go?" in a polite tone as his window was rolled down. He didn't speak. He slowly started reversing, and he soon disappeared behind a curve. Now I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he was alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still, since I wasn't sure what was going on. At this point, I was not scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and adverse thoughts began gathering in the back of my mind. I heard the car, and the engine, stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing from that point on. I turned around and began walking towards my destination at a much faster pace than before. Now I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer and why he just reversed and left without a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again or to see him again for that matter. I had just walked enough for these unpleasant thoughts to slowly be erased from my mind. As I had been drinking a lot of water, as I usually do, I decided to take a piss. I saw a perfect spot, a very narrow path off my trail that led quite clearly to a little hunting tower. I don't know what there could be on the trail, in the direction where I was headed. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on that trail, since the small one to the tower was well hidden by trees, and you couldn't see the main trail, as it was running perpendicularly to the small one. I looked at him, and I was instantly chilled to the very bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing, with a baseball hat on his head. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point I was fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident with the SUV, I would have probably walked on along the trail, thinking he's a hunter. However, in light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in these woods this time of year. I figured, in the matter of 2 seconds, that I was going to sprint through the woods until exhaustion, towards and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in 2 minutes. If I'm right, it's the best call I will have ever made. And for duck's sake, he began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I began sprinting away. I sprinted past the tower and deep into the bushes, not sparing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through branches and small trees and slipped on several occasions. I really did sprint until I was exhausted. It must have been several kilometers. I even crossed some smaller trails but didn't even bother to look either way. My pulse was a billion the whole time. I began checking my phone for a signal, but nothing. I was already really angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. After a while I began power walking, but still off trail, straight ahead, in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone got a signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me too seriously. They said I was overreacting and whatnot. You must have misunderstood the situation. Well, I'll let you decide for yourselves if I did or not. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a charming little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like eternity, but I walked the last kilometer to the main square, took off my jumper, and put it in my bag. At least I looked a little different from far away. I waited for a bus that took me back to a station near my car, rather anxiously. After the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road, I walked back to my car, got in, and drove home. My dog welcomed me like I was coming back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are just amazing. She must have felt that something shook me up. I spent the afternoon contemplating my life in the bathtub. The boots destroyed my feet, but they aren't meant to be sprinted in for long periods of time. I called the forest's gamekeeper's office. I inquired about whether they have such cars in service as the one I came across. They do not. Their gamekeepers also don't typically work in pairs. Like 99.9% of the time, they are alone. I told them my story, and they took me a lot more seriously than my friends, but they assured me that the police wouldn't. No one could have been legally hunting in the area during the summer, either. I've been reading local news, but nothing extraordinary has been reported yet. I really hope nothing will be reported either. Gentlemen in the empty forest at lunchtime, let's not meet again.